Spinal adjustments provided by Dr. Chad Rolfson. The Spinal Tuning Chiropractic Center is a Des Moines area low flat fee per month unlimited chiropractic care practice. When life happens, just adjust. Schedule today at spinaltuning.com. Welcome to One-on-One. I am your host, Jimmy Olsen, and joining me, he is, now it's semi-retired lawyer in Iowa, or is it full retired, or you're still kind of doing something?
Well, I'm not getting paid for much, so I guess it's probably more than semi.
He is also a deacon for the Diocese of Des Moines, and something I just found out myself, he's an author of a couple murder mysteries and co-host of Faith on Trial on Iowa Catholic Radio, which is also a podcast. You can check that out. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome with me Mike Manno. Mike, how are you, man?
Thank you. I'm very good.
Very good.
Very
so,
good. I can see them all out there applauding.
Oh, well. We'll make the sound effects for you. So, I actually work with Mike at my real job outside of when I, try to attempt to do these little podcast things like this. But we were having a conversation about a week ago or so about these the protests and things that are going on. And just kind of threw a little idea of a conversation that I wanted to have, and I figured you'd be the great guy to have the conversation with. And a lot of people that have known me for years and listen to my podcast know that I kind of have that spiritual background, what my beliefs are, because I'm not very quiet about it. And
you're not supposed to be.
No,
you're
no.
not supposed to be.
But you also don't need to be rude about it either.
That's right.
Which I'll admit, there was a time in my life. Because, I grew up more of the Pentecostal charismatic, so I was that 2x4 Bible Christian.
Yes, stand out in front of the grocery store with a megaphone and...
No, the one that would knock you over the head with the Bible if you didn't believe what I said. Basically, hey, it's my way or the highway, and figure it out. But of course, as we get older, we mellow out or we understand things a little better. But one of the first things that popped in my mind with the conversation we were having is a scripture, which is, and of course, I might get this wrong, but if I do, I'm sure you will correct me being a deacon, but 1 Timothy 2:15, right? Where it talks about, when someone asks you about your faith or about your hope, depending on the translation that you're using, that you give a quiet and gentle or quiet and reverent answer. And what kind of triggered me on that is also looking at, not even looking at the spiritual side of things, just looking at our life in general and what we're dealing with protests, not just now, but over the years, and how just that word, that scripture can say, if you want someone to listen to you, don't beat them over the head with it.
Right. And of course, there's the speaker's advice that when you want to draw attention to what you're saying, you drop your voice. You speak in a lower tone, because then people will struggle to listen to you, will try harder to hear what you're saying. And, of course, then you got to remember, too, and Jesus said, when you're being tried and you're being pushed and you're asked to defend the faith, you don't need to rehearse what you're going to say. We'll give you the words.
Exactly.
We'll give you the words. So I think you take these things together, and just common sense says that if you articulate your position quietly and comfortably, you're going to get through to people. Now, some people you won't get through to because they're not going to listen.
Well, and on the other side of that is, if you never agree with me, that's still okay. That's why we're individuals. I have my opinion, I have my philosophy, and you have yours. But being an adult, we should be able to have that conversation and still walk away, still have a beer afterwards.
Right. But that's not what we're having.
Right.
Is the problem. Everybody's shouting past one another. And you see that especially out on the streets today, where the topic is anything but religion, really.
Right.
But people are shouting at one another. They're throwing rocks at one another. And you're bad because I say you're bad and because you don't agree with me. And then they go off in this cancel culture thing where you try and remove the person from society. You remove them from their job. You get them fired or whatever because their beliefs and what they have to say aren't worth anybody listening to. So that's how some people now are trying to argue their cases now in society, is that your statements, your beliefs are not worth my time to listen to, and they're not worth anybody else listening to, so you have to shut up. And so we're going to kick you off social media platforms and things like that.
You're listening to One-on-One. I'm your host, Jimmy Olsen, and joining me is Deacon Mike Manno. He is co-host for Faith on Trial, and we're kind of talking about having a conversation and even a adult conversation. And at one point, you and I were having a conversation a few weeks ago, which kind of like brought this on, that even if you were in line at a grocery store and there's someone there protesting, standing on the corner, whatever it is, with a bullhorn, I might agree with your beliefs, your thoughts, your stance, but you're kind of pushing me out. I mean, I don't want to, I don't need you blowing in my face.
Right. Hand me your piece of literature, but don't yell at me.
Right.
Okay. If you've got something to say and you've got a brochure, hand it to me as I'm going into the store. That's fine. My dad was a printer. He told me always take anything anybody hands you because it keeps printers alive. Right?
Keeps printers in business,
That's
son.
right,
It's
right.
how I feed you.
That's right. That's right. So I've got a little bit of printer's ink in my blood, I guess. So I take all those things. You hand it to me, I'll take it, because that way you have to get more printed. Whether it's good or bad or whatever, you have to get more printed.
Well, I mean, and that still comes to, going back to the old verbiage that Ronald Reagan used, but then even in the scripture, what the trust and verify. You are taking that pamphlet, so now you can actually go home, look it over, and go, okay, are they right? Are they wrong? Or is there a piece of this that I can support? Really be able to research that and delve into it. And I think that's another problem that we run into. I mean, number one, I think if you did not take debate, you need to go back and take debate, because that's what it comes down to, learning how to debate rationally and as an adult without yelling, which that's the other part we run into when people start screaming or yelling. And then next thing you know, you try to just have that quiet conversation with them. They start pointing fingers and calling names. And in my book, when someone starts pointing fingers and calling names, that means you really have no clue what you're talking about. That's the way I see it.
And unfortunately, that's when some people start loading their weapons.
Right. Well, there's that too.
Yeah. But you mentioned Ronald Reagan. I remember Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill. Now, there couldn't be two people politically more different. They got along very well together. They got along very well together. They argued. They worked things out. They had meetings in the White House. Then they opened the bar. That's the way they did. And that's the way we should do it. And when you talk about somebody giving me a piece of literature, I may not agree with them, but I agree that they have the right to do that.
Right. No, absolutely.
And that's respect for that person as an individual, that they have the right to express their viewpoint. I may not agree with it. I may never defend it. I may reject it. I may go home and look at it when I take the paper home and say, that guy's a moron,
Right.
But
I'm calling you names in the privacy of my own home.
Yeah, that's
not
right.
to your face.
But, he has the right to do that.
Right.
And that's fine. And you have to respect him for that. I mean, that's part of the social compact that we have, or we should have here, is that you can say what you want. I'll respect your right to say it, but I don't have to agree.
Well, it also brings the golden rule into there, too. Treat others as you wish to be treated. If you want someone to listen to you, then you should be willing to listen to them.
Right. Absolutely.
It's pretty, again, I look at this and I'm going, this seems pretty simple, but you watch the interaction and it's not that simple.
Well, that's because you have people that are irrational.
Right.
Rational people should be able to sit down and have a discussion like we are. And you can agree on A, and I can disagree and promote B, but we can have a rational discussion about it. And if you're unable to get involved in that rational discussion, then you don't know what the issues really are. It's for too many people, it's just a hot button thing. Well, I'm opposed to that.
Right.
But you don't know why you're opposed.
Right. Well, I mean, or with any kind of discussion, argument we'll use for argument's sake,
Right.
there still needs to be a little bit of emotion. Because if you're, even in debate, you learn that. And you being a lawyer for all those years, you have to have some sort of emotion when you're pleading for someone to, if you're doing a jury trial, to lean your way. Or even if it's just a judge, you want the judge to, you want to win that case. But it's that balance of emotion and the balance of logic, bringing them together. But you are seeing way more emotion in these arguments or protests than the logic to that.
The emotion usually comes on the side of the defense. If you look at a criminal case, a prosecutor should be very dispassionate as he's putting the evidence together. The defense, if it doesn't have much of a defense, that's when they were engaged in the emotional argument.
Sure.
But no, both sides should be based on facts, and that's what a trial is supposed to do, determine what these facts are. And then the jury can make up its mind what it thinks is the truth that really happened and make a judgment accordingly. Sometimes I agree with them, sometimes I don't. But that's the process we use. But it depends on people understanding what the other side is saying. When I taught college, a lot of times I was teaching political science and law and things like that. People would get into debates, and what I would do is I would stop them in the middle of their debate, and I would ask one, I'd say, now you tell me what he just said. You explain to me what this guy you've been debating this with is saying. Well,
right.
Sometimes they can't do that. But that's one thing I would recommend people try. Understand what the other side is trying to say. Repeat it. Be able to repeat it so that you understand and so that he understands that you understand his side. Then do the same to the other side, and eventually you get to the point where you're going back and arguing about facts and logic and not shouting at one another because I don't like you.
Right.
You're not the right political party, you're not the right religion, you're not the right color, you're not the right anything. And so I'm going to disagree with you now.
Again, you are listening to One on One. I'm your host, Jimmy Olsen, and I'm chatting with Deacon Mike Manno. He is a co-host of Faith on Trial, which you can check out that podcast at iowacatholicradio.com. And we're kind of chatting, really, I guess, to really break it down, we're chatting protests. Because even if you think about it, a protest is a very casual courtroom.
Yeah.
If you really, because you're standing for what you believe, you're out in the but more of a public view rather than closed doors. Right. So it's like a court of public opinion rather than a judge and jury or judge and or the Supreme Court or whoever it is, trying to get them and being able to have that conversation, quietly.
Yeah,
simply.
One of the problems I think we really have today, and this is something that bothers me, and I have a column I write every week for the Catholic newspaper, The Wanderer, and I've taken this subject up many times, and that's the inability of our media today to give both sides of an argument.
Don't get me started on the media. I've been doing media for, like you being a lawyer, I'm a media guy.
Right. And I started out in journalism. My undergraduate degree is in journalism. I was a daily newspaper editor at one time in my 20s. And I have a great deal of respect for the profession. That's what I started out as.
Absolutely.
But my respect for the people in it now has diminished quite a bit because you hear all the time, each, depending on which channel you go to, they're taking somebody's talking points and taking them as fact, and of course the other side is bad.
Or it's becoming more of a editorial.
Yeah,
or a opinion page rather than here are the facts, here's what's going on, here is what you need to know. Because what I need to know, I'll be honest, I've been doing it way too long. It does not get me ratings, which does not get me money. And we need money because they need money to pay me because if they're not getting that.
Sure, if it bleeds, it leads.
Exactly. And another piece, going to more on the, not just the protests that we've been hearing a lot over the last few weeks with everyone, really getting tired of sitting at home for the coronavirus or the masks or the racism and all that, but even looking at the Christian or the spiritual side of things, either being a Protestant, being Catholic, Baptist, Methodist, whoever ends up standing up for their belief, they always like to use the argument, my righteous anger. Because Jesus went into the temple and flipped over the tables because he was mad and he was making his point. And it's like, again, know what you're talking about? I mean, he was in a temple where people were, it's like going into a church, and I know people have problems with this. Going into a church, you have a merchandise area that sells stuff, coffee shop, whatever it is, which I don't see a problem with that. And I don't know that, and I'll say this, I don't know that Jesus has a problem with that. The problem he was having is that they were taking advantage. If a dove was $2, they were selling it for $10 because you forgot your dove at home and I need it to go in and do my sacrifice or whatever that was. So he was mad at those that knew better, that were in, high places, in that religious, council or where it was. And so it'd be like talking to a priest or a pastor. Right. You're taking advantage of your people. Yeah. Now, I have a problem with that. Now,
I do too.
Now, that conversation, because now I'm looking at you one-on-one, maybe I could get a little more upset with you.
Yeah. I think what was happening, too, with Jesus overturning the tables and things like that is they have replaced the worship of God with the worship of these transactions. Of course, we don't have a big get-together anymore, but usually after Mass, there's coffee and donuts. Sometimes we have people come in from the Holy Land or something, and they've got things to sell.
Right.
That's fine.
Yeah, it's like when we had guest speakers, when you were done, they had their books or CDs for sale after.
Right, but that's separate from the worship, okay? And then they go and they do this,
Well, and at least the ones that I've been to, they never really overcharged. In fact, usually when we had a guest speaker come in, it's like, and tonight only I'm going to give you, 2 for 1 of my books or 2 for 1 of my CDs. They kind of help you out of, I want you to have my information. And I think that's that thin line that we hear that people step across way too easy because, again, emotion takes over rather than logic.
Yeah, and a lot of times those people will help you out if you don't have money to pay for what they have. I remember I worked
absolutely.
I worked as a chaplain in a drug and alcohol rehabilitation thing, and a lot of times I would take some of those kids over to church with me because they'd always say, "We want to see your church." They weren't necessarily Catholic, but they want to see. Some of them became Catholic after coming. But I remember one case, I think it was one of the girls was looking at some jewelry that they brought in from the Holy Land, and she didn't have enough money for what she wanted to get, and it was a religious type thing, and she had like half of what, and a guy gave it to her for that. Oh, wow. Because they're in a ministry too sometimes.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Just like we have a Catholic bookstore here, Divine Treasures. That's a ministry in and of itself.
Right.
To go over there and to browse their selections and what they have. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, you're listening to One-on-One. I'm your host, Jimmy Olsen. Been chatting with Deacon Mike Manno. He is a deacon with the Diocese of Des Moines. Semi-plus retired lawyer, but...
I'm really not as old as I look. I'm only about 26. It's practicing law and being a deacon that's done this to me.
Well, being a lawyer, that whole overcharging thing, you've made your millions, so you don't have to...
What's the story of the dead lawyer that appears before St. Peter? St. Peter's looking at the record, and he says, I see you died at 172. The man says, no, I was only 65 when I died. St. Peter says, I'm sorry, I was looking at your billing record.
So along with being the co-host of Faith on Trial, how else can people follow along and see different things that you do? Because you also have the article that you write.
I have the articles that I write every week for The Wanderer. I have a Facebook page that you can, and I usually post those on the Facebook page when they're published. And we have a Faith on Trial Facebook page itself, where we carry some of these things that are going on. And then we have a blog, Faith on Trial Radio. Yeah, I'm drawing a blank here. That's
never happened to me ever in 30 years.
Maybe I am as old as I look. Anyway, it's faithontrialradio.blogspot.
Okay.
And we put things, usually what we put up on the blog are things that maybe are too long or too involved or something to put up on those other things. So we put those up there.
So they can find you on Facebook at Faith on Trial, as well as Mike Manno, so they can find your articles and stuff.
Right.
And then either look for Mike Manno or Faith on Trial on Blogspot as well. Mike, thank you very much for your time.
Certainly,
man.
appreciate being here. Hope to be back again sometime.
You are listening or have been listening to One-on-One. I'm your host, Jimmy Olsen. You can listen to One-on-One by going to the iHeartRadio app, downloading the podcast as well through Apple Podcasts, Google Play. It's available on Spotify. So if you enjoyed this episode, share it with others and subscribe so you can always hear whenever there is a podcast available to download. You can even follow along on my YouTube page at My Buddy Jimmy 101.